Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles individuals who are passionate about what they do for a living, about what organization they belong to, or simply passionate about the community they are a part of. Hello there, and welcome. My name is Dave Cunningham.
And today we have a special guest who is very passionate about his music, passionate about performing, but also passionate about preserving the history of all the Kingston bands who have ever played here or who continue to play here and entertain audiences right across the city and beyond. Larry Stafford is his name. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. We'll get you to lean in a little closer to the mic there. That would be great. Now, for those of you listening today who have attended shows at the Grand Theatre, at the K-Rock Center, at the Old Memorial Center, you might remember seeing Larry running around making sure the sound is perfect for the show, whether it be music shows or theater or whatever. You've spent a lot of time in the theaters.
I have. Actually, I have been working as part of crew and now more on the management side at the Grand Theatre for about 35, 40 years. So I don't like to put an exact date on that. But yes, and I've had my own private sound and lighting companies in Kingston as well, which, has put me in the spotlight a lot more often than you would think, hopefully. But.
And doing a good job.
Well, thank you.
All the way along. Now, we're going to approach the show from two angles. We're going to talk about your musical career, but we're also going to talk about a little side project that at times I think probably overwhelms you in terms of the volume that ends up happening with this particular side project. But let's go back to your musical career now. You couldn't help but be involved in music because your dad used to own a music shop in town.
That's right, and he also was a trumpet player and had his own dance bands back from when he left the Army after the Second War, and it was a musical family. I started playing trumpet myself in public school, so it's been a long career in music for sure.
Now let's talk about some of the bands that you've been in and some of the different kinds of music that you have played. So I don't know if you mentioned how long you've been playing, but we can be honest here and say
in actual
it's
bands,
been a while.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I don't mind. It's approaching 50 years that I've been playing in bands as such, where you would have a name of a band. I think I started, mentioned earlier there, in high school with a couple of throw-together things that really didn't even have names in '63. So I actually really started playing in bands when the Beatle thing happened in 1964. I started playing in actual bands then.
Interesting that you should mention that, because if we talk about what influenced people to get involved in music, and you were suggesting that it was the Beatles and the British invasion that sort of stimulated people to go out and get a drum kit or buy themselves an electric guitar. It wasn't Elvis that did that. It was more the Beatles. Do you have any sense as to why?
Well, again, the Elvis thing, there were local musician followers of Elvis back even in the late 50s when long before I started. But it all exploded when the British thing happened. I think it was because even if you couldn't sing or you couldn't play the drums, well, maybe I can play bass guitar instead, So everybody, it was a
with
heyday.
Apologies to the bass players around.
Well, it was a heyday in the music store scene for my dad and all the other stores in the area. Every kid on every corner was playing in a band, so the sales were good, for sure. And I definitely think it changed big when the British invasion happened.
Mm-hmm. When you started playing in bands, what sort of music were you guys playing back then?
Usually just commercial, right off the radio type hits. I started the first band that I really played out in playing keyboards and doing some singing, harmony singing. I didn't sing lead at all in those days. Because I played trumpet right through school, a little later on when that started to become a big thing, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Chicago, Tower of Power, my favorite type of bands, I switched over and played a lot more trumpet than I did keyboards. And started singing a lot more too.
We could sort of go on all kinds of tangents here with respect to music and music that we've had the opportunity to hear in this town. And I'm going to take a little side trip here because you mentioned the trumpet and because you mentioned brass in a rock band. Go back to the Chicago concert that happened here not that long ago.
I was at that.
And so was I. It was an awesome show, one of the best shows I've seen in town, personally.
Yep.
And one of the things that I really enjoyed as part of that show was the trombone player, and I can't remember. Is it Pankow?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
James Pankow, I think
That's
it is.
right, yeah.
Okay, so he's playing the trombone, and these guys have played concerts, I don't know for how many years, 40 or 50 years, and he looked like he was having a whale of a time playing, and he was the guy who was getting the audience all revved up.
Yeah,
during the
for
course
sure.
of that.
Yeah.
And that's something I really enjoy about a show is seeing the band indicate that they're having a good time and it's not just a paying gig for them.
Oh, it's funny you mention that because I've stressed that to a lot of bands I've been in, and I think even on a much smaller scale for bands that were playing in clubs in the Kingston area when I was in with horn bands, and usually they're 7-piece bands. So for people that aren't just crowding the dance floor, that are actually watching the band perform, there's always something there to watch. There's some excitement going on. Oh, look, there's a big horn section, and they've got some basic choreography moves, or they got 2 girl singers in this band. It's amazing. So there's always something fresh and new to entertain the audience, much more readily than in, say, a 4-piece guitar rock band.
So when you started playing, you were sort of copying what was on the radio, what was popular at the time. So as your playing evolved, the kind of music you play evolve as well?
Oh, absolutely. Again, I've been in some bands where it's strictly cover band. You take the record and you try and learn it note for note. Or then I've been in some other bands where you get a little room to stretch your legs, as they say, and I did that to try and learn to improvise and be able to take a solo on the spot. Somebody turns to you and says, away you go, take a piano solo. And of course, the first 20 years of my musical career, I didn't do any of that, so I like to stretch out that way, and even fool around with a little bit of original material too.
How hard is that to do when you've been doing the cover band approach for years, entertaining folks who are coming to expect certain kinds of music from you, and then you throw in an original tune?
I've always said, and sometimes not even an original tune, but a tune that you're 90% sure nobody's ever heard before, and you're gonna steal a song. I was in a band where we were playing Bod Skeggs before anybody had ever heard of Bod Skeggs. So to them in the audience, that was an original tune. You could have said you wrote it, and they would have never known the difference. But if you mix them up, if you play 3 songs they know right off the radio, and bang, while they're on the dance floor, you throw in one that's a good beat to it, that's original. The crowd will appreciate it just as much.
And they'll continue dancing.
That's right. I remember people walking out singing lyrics from a song that we had played earlier that evening that I am sure they had never heard that song before. But it stuck with them. It was a song that had a familiar hook to it that, and these girls were walking out of the bar saying, I said, boy, you know that song? And they said, no, we just heard you play it. And that's the first they'd ever heard it. Yeah.
From a band's perspective, when you're playing and there's dancing available for people, what's more important to you as a band member? Is for people to be listening to you or getting up and dancing?
Oh, no, there's nothing better for a band than to have the dance floor full, not only for bar sales, but it just makes the night much more enjoyable for the band if you know that people are enjoying it. And whether they're sitting watching and not dancing, I mean, keep in mind that musicians aren't dancers, so they never had time to learn to dance. They're too busy. Whether they're just sitting back and watching, but it's always nicer when you do have people on the dance floor, I think.
We talked a little bit earlier on about the importance in rock of the brass section, and so there's a good example of that sort of song.
Yeah. Now, that's just one sax player in there, mind you. It sounds like a big horn band, but it's Steve Kennedy just playing the saxophone with that band.
You got all these names, don't you?
Well, some of them are a little hard to think of, and surprisingly on my Facebook connections, I'll run into somebody that I'd totally forgotten about. I'm particularly big on the Canadian music scene. No, that's my thing for sure.
We alluded to it at the beginning of the show, so let's talk about it. The Facebook page is called Kingston History of Bands.
That's correct.
And I want the listening audience to grab a pen and paper and write that down. Kingston History of Bands. Because if you have lived in Kingston for any length of time and have enjoyed different components of the music scene, that's a place to go. I know that when you and I were talking about it, and I was just sitting there and I was going through page after page after page, looking at the people, and let's go way back. Let's talk about how all of this got started. Way back to your dad's record store.
Yeah, well, I collected all the bands that would come in that were performing anywhere in Kingston, of course, in the music store, and say, can we pin this up? And, of course, they'd never come back, so I would keep the pictures and put them in a scrapbook and saved all I could. And I wish I'd saved more, to be honest with you. But so a friend of mine said, you should start a Facebook page and start, doing the history of Kingston bands. So I did just that, thinking it would be small scale. But it took off so rapidly, and then I invited people to send me pictures, and I'd post them. And what I've tried to do is break it down into different eras and categories, types of music. There's a section, memorials to those great musicians in Kingston that have passed on, things like that. And I think there's somewhere in the vicinity, somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 pictures in there now. So it's really exploded, and it'll slow down for a while, and then all of a sudden I'll get an influx. Somebody will send me in a bunch of new pictures. And I encourage new bands, young fellows, to send in the pictures of their bands too. I'll post them all. It's good promotion, and it's there forever, hopefully. We have a website too, but I haven't got everything transferred in there, so that if a couple of years from now Facebook isn't the popular media source, that they'll still be preserved there on an actual website.
One of the things I noticed about looking through the pictures of the various bands going back to the 40s, in some cases, is the fashion.
Oh, yeah.
The clothes.
Yeah.
What we all wore back then.
Yeah, it's amazing. And as you say, going way back before my time, before I was born, there's pictures of bands from the 40s. Of course, my dad played in dance bands in those days. So there's some of that in there. There's some old family country type bands from the area that didn't know anybody in the picture at all. And then gradually people would see it on Facebook, and they'd say, well, that's my uncle so-and-so. And we were able to name everybody in that picture. That was one of the real amazing ones, where eventually we got everybody's name that was in that picture.
Because you'll go back in and put the names in.
Yeah, as people submit it and say, well, that's my Uncle Jack or something, then I'll message them and say, can you tell me who any of the other people are? And eventually you nail it down, Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the names of some of the people whose pictures are there. We talked about one particular name before we play the song, and that's Bernie Dobbin.
Oh, yes.
Bernie Dobbin, did he play, or was he just in management?
He did play. He played in bluegrass bands, a mandolin player, right up to the end. Unfortunately, Bernie left us, it must be 15 years ago now, or I'm guessing. But Bernie formed an agency in Kingston right when all the bands were forming, and he went out and found work for the bands all through the Ottawa Valley. I mean, Bernie went on to much bigger things later on with Colleen Peterson, and went to Nashville with her, and she recorded with Glenn Campbell, and she was the singer in the Charlie Daniels Band. So he did do some big things too, but Street Noise was his pet band for quite a while. He just loved the band, and he really took a personal interest in us. He certainly kept us working a lot for a lot of years, as he did for all the bands in the Kingston area. Another
name, a couple of names, and I've sort of arbitrarily chosen a couple of names simply because I know them. Bill Jocelyn is
Bill.
one.
Yeah.
Bill has been in a lot of bands, and I saw his picture in a lot of different time periods. So give me a chronology of some of the bands he's played in over the years.
Well, Bill actually started before me, and so. and
Does that mean he's older than you are?
No, I think we're the same age. But he just started at a very young age, and he bought his very first guitar at my dad's music store, which we've talked about lots of times. So he started real interest in rock and roll back in, I'd say, probably 1960, and started playing professionally shortly thereafter. He did a long run with Georgette Fry in the Running Shoe Review band that they called, and they had an album. Bill played in a band called 2 Minute Hate, which was during the Jimi Hendrix Cream type time with the power trios, just guitar, bass, and drums. And
68, 69,
yeah,
somewhere
that's
in there.
right. Yeah, late 60s. And he's played in some country rock bands. He played with Doug McClement and Jeff Green in a band called Comfort for quite some time, which was a little more folk country type of thing. So he's got a lot of roots. He's played in a lot of different things. He played in Dan Aykroyd's backup band more recently. Also.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's amazing where some of these little stories and details come out about these people.
Yeah. Bill's been a figure in the music scene just about as long as anyone now. Yeah.
Let's talk about Michael Myers.
The hardest working musician in Kingston. Michael plays more than anybody I know, and I always have a huge respect for anybody in this area the size of Kingston that can do nothing but play music to make their living. It usually means playing in 4 or 5 different formats. Mike plays solo just by himself. He's done all kinds of work at the retirement homes and things like that. He's always been that way.
He does a duo on the cruise ships, or the Cruise 1,000 Islands.
Yeah, he still does that every summer with Spencer Evans currently. He has a rock band that does a lot of British rock stuff from the 60s, just a lot of, and he has the big band. Big Fat Horn Band is one that packs the RCHA club every time they play there, and it's about I think it's an 11 or 12 piece band, so it's a big band.
That's a big band for that room.
Lately he's gone more into, he loves to sing jazz ballads. He does the Bobby Show where he does all of the old Bobby ballad singers, Bobby Darin, Bobby Vinton, all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. There's quite an evolution for some of these people who have made Kingston their home and continue to live here and play here over the years, going back to the 50s and the 60s all the way up to today.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, as I say, to make your entire living at playing in bands, and there is a small number of people that do in Kingston, and I've always admired the fact that they are able to do that. For me, it's a hobby, and that's always an issue when you get in a band where some of the players are trying to make a living at music, and me, I'm not worrying about how much we play, just that we are, in fact, still able to play.
The fingers still work and the vocal cords still work. You've talked a bit about how many bands there were, the quality of the bands that Kingston has seen over the years. What do you see going forward? What do you see as the kind of influence that musicians can take from the city?
Well, Kingston's always had a vibrant music scene. Everybody admits to that. Unfortunately, to really make a full-time career of it, other than playing like Mike Myers does around the area, you have to take off if you want, especially if you want to get into the whole recording world, although that's become easier to do out of your home these days too. But it's still going to always be Toronto as the mainstay. Vancouver has its own scene there. Montreal has, but in the older times, back in the 60s, 70s, it was, again, that much harder to get the big breaks for Canadian bands. You see Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, and all, they had to go to the United States to become the successes that they did. I don't think that's the situation now. I think a lot of young musicians that are coming up can really jump up the ladder fast, and even based out of Kingston. The Glorious Sons is an example of a young group right now that's really taken off. And their whole history has only been about 5 years, And of course, we don't need to discuss Tragically Hip. We know where that led to. So, I worked with those guys when they were, just in college, and it was just thrown together for a fun band, and no intention to do anything near what they did.
And it seems today, too, that when you are recording, like you said, you can record in your own home and put out a good quality product. And I think the product is meant more these days to advertise the live performance as opposed to what it may have been in the 60s and 70s where you were recording to sell records. You're not selling as much product these days, I would guess, or it could be wrong.
No, that's very true. I mean, again, when you say live performance recordings, because I've always played in live situations, some of my favorite albums are the live albums because you get that crowd spontaneity with it. It does things for the band. If there's a mistake, hey, there's a mistake. It's there. It doesn't have to be perfect every time,
Right. Larry, I want to thank you very much for coming in today. Certainly appreciated the time that you've given us.
Oh, it's been a real pleasure.
Theme music for the program is Stasis Oasis, a tune written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of our episodes, please send a note to the Kingstonian Podcast Facebook page. This is Dave Cunningham from Kingston, Ontario. Thank you for listening. Until next time.